Now, every few years since the 90s, there seems to be some type of movie or biopic in the making about the Jackson family or Michael Jackson in particular. And recently, the newest biopic was Michael that came out last month. Now, I was pretty excited when it got announced they had plans to have Michael's nephew Jafar Jackson play Michael in the film, so they were keeping everything in the family this go round. But even though this was the case, I do want to quickly mention that just because he was Michael's nephew, he still had to do a crap ton of work to even prepare for his auditions because the spot just wasn't given to him. They really made him work for it, especially since he didn't have any acting experience before this. Only really in music, which a good bit of folks actually don't know about either. There were quite a few people saying that one of the well-known MJ impersonators over on TikTok should have been put in that spot, but I was happy that they didn't do that. Even if Jafar was the son of one of the brothers that Michael always seemed annoyed by.
Also, I'd like to thank all my brothers who I love very dearly, including Jermaine.
But Jermaine, honestly, might want to give up whatever fountain of youth he's been chasing after.
We really gotta unpack Jermaine. Jermaine looks more like the Tin Man every time I see him. Just slick down.
But back to the movie though. So the Jackson family had been in talks regarding bringing this film to life for literally years. I read somewhere that it was around 7, so almost a decade. But they finally got things off the ground around 2024, but then there were reshoots and major revisions being made in 2025. However, regardless, they were still able to release the film this year, and I finally got a chance to watch it yesterday, and I really wanted to talk about what I thought about it and also what other folks have been saying about it. Now, the film itself covered from Michael's childhood up to his solo career success in the late 80s. There were some people who were asking about showing his career after that time period, but this film was already 2 hours long, and if they had tried to cover the rest of Michael's career and life, we would have been in that dang theater forever. But I think it was just really trying to focus on Michael growing into his own, from this clearly talented kid from Gary, Indiana, to this man that now had the confidence to stand up to his dad and do what he wanted with his life. Now, it's pretty apparent that Joe was kind of the driving force behind the creation of the group the Jackson 5, and then also the one who was managing and pushing them to really go big or go home. However, he's also seen as the villain, as the Jackson siblings have gone on to describe him as being quick to discipline physically, but it was clearly a very complicated relationship that they all had with their dad, because obviously the relationship was different with him being their manager and telling them to refer to him as Joe and not dad. So they saw him as both their manager and dad still. So even if he was strict and borderline abusive, he was still their dad, unfortunately, who was also trying to get them out of the life that they were living because he saw them all as being talented enough to be something more than what he was, which was a steel mill worker. I really wonder sometimes if we would have gotten Michael Jackson if it wasn't for Joe Jackson, seeing the potential and shaping his early career. Yeah, there were a hell of a lot of areas for Joe to improve on when it came to being a father, but you can tell that he also just wanted more for his family. So I understand why whenever his kids talk about him, even after his passing in 2018, why they always sound a bit conflicted, because they obviously didn't like certain sides of him, but there were also sides that they appreciated at the end of the day. Now, obviously this doesn't mean he was overall a great human being, because this was him right after Michael had passed back in 2009, for crying out loud.
The last couple of days, I know it's been really tough for you guys.
And? Yeah, it has. It has been really tough. Remember, we just lost the biggest star in the world, superstar in the world, so it's been tough.
Why'd you just... Thank you. How is, you said your wife is, what about Janet and the rest of the family, the daughters and everything?
They're all doing fine, but I want to make this statement.
Ranch Records.
Right.
Okay, distributed by Blu-ray
Right.
Technology.
Yeah.
And that's his next step.
He definitely overworked them in dictatorship fashion, and was way too strict according to Michael. But it was what also shaped their work ethic and gave them that drive to constantly do and be their best on that stage. But it did come at a cost, clearly, because they didn't really get to have much of a childhood, particularly when it came to Michael and Janet, who were two of the youngest and biggest stars to come out of the Jackson family. Now, unfortunately, Janet wasn't in this film, or portrayed in it, I should say, as she was approached by the director Antoine Fuqua about it, but she kindly declined. However, even though it was reported that she gave Fuqua and Jafar her blessings for the film, she allegedly didn't want to partake in it because of past run-ins and drama from Michael's management and current estate. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more in a bit, but I thought that both Jafar and Colman Domingo played the hell out of their father and son roles. And I do think that Jafar had a similar kind of quiet demeanor to Michael. I think overall though, the casting team did a really good job with this one because everyone looked pretty close to the actual people they were playing. Now, in the beginning of the Jackson 5's career, there was Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown Records, and he would become a pretty crucial mentor for Michael and kind of like a father figure since he was kind of missing one. And Joe was kind of wrapped up in his managerial role. Another father figure that gets introduced into Michael's life was his security guard Bill Bray, who would accompany Michael on all of his major tours and would also serve as somewhat of a confidant for him until he retired at the age of 70 and passed away in 2005. But Barry describes Michael as a sponge, studying his every move. However, what was very interesting, since we're on the subject of mentors, was the fact that all the scenes with Diana Ross had to be cut from the film. The actress that was playing her in a few scenes, Kat Graham, had apparently said, quote, "Legal considerations affected a few scenes, including the ones I filmed." So even though Diana played a pretty significant part in Michael's life, we couldn't see that in this film. So not only was Janet not in the film, but neither was Diana. However, she and Michael's relationship was pretty interesting because it started in his childhood, when the Jackson 5 moved to Los Angeles in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and he kind of saw her as a mother figure. But as he got older, he seemingly, allegedly, started developing a little crush on her, referring to her as his, quote, "mother, sister, and lover all combined in one." And he would often call her his first love. So it was a pretty interesting and kind of complicated relationship considering the age gap and the time in which Diana had come into Michael's life. So with all that said, I kind of wonder if there was some concern from Diana Ross's camp that the film would portray her in a light that might not make her look so great considering she was a decade plus older than Michael. I could see how it might have tainted her icon status a little bit in this day and age. But I'm getting way off topic here. So in the film, we kind of jump from Michael's time in the Jackson 5 as the lead singer from the late 60s up to the late 70s when he'd started working on his first studio album, Off the Wall, with Quincy Jones. But also around this time, he'd broken his nose during a dance rehearsal, which resulted in his first rhinoplasty. And he would go on to continue having extensive procedures in later life to reportedly try to correct the damage, which was complicated by his chronic skin condition and also his autoimmune issues. However, what I didn't like is that in the film, they just made it seem like he just walked into the plastic surgeon's office and decided to make changes to his nose, so I wasn't a fan of that. But Michael overall was starting to branch out at this time, and it was still happening under Joe's thumb. And his first album, Off the Wall, did well and won him his first solo Grammy. However, it didn't do as well as he was hoping, and being the person that Michael was, he always was trying to find a way to push the envelope. So this was when he started working on the record-breaking solo sophomore album, Thriller, and there would also be some slick jabs at Prince in there too that I thought was funny, since they did have a little bit of a rivalry going on in real life. But to this day, Thriller remains the best-selling album of all time, with estimated global sales exceeding 66 to over 100 million copies. And with the way album sales and streams are going these days, I don't think there will ever be an album or artist that will ever top that. It was the very first album to be certified 30 times multi-platinum in the US, and now over 34 times. It also spent 37 non-consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart, and just think about how absolutely crazy all of that is. But in the movie, we get to see a little bit more of the preparation and the strategy that went into releasing and promoting this album, and how Michael was really setting a whole new bar for music videos in general. Of course, Joe still wanted to keep his cash cow Michael close and continue to use him to tour with his brothers, but Michael eventually hires his own lawyer, John Branca, played by Miles Teller in the film, and fires Joe as Michael's manager, at Michael's request, of course. But when Joe confronts him about it, and also about rejoining his brothers for another tour, and even a few commercials, he says something that was pretty interesting. He says to Michael that if he were to branch out on his own, he would only be surrounded by yes men, and he'd also be lonely. And in a sense, he wasn't entirely wrong, because in real life, Michael was pretty lonely. And Janet made mention of this back in her documentary that came out a few years ago, where she talks about Michael's team getting in between him and the rest of the family, basically almost indirectly severing his ties for him to his family. But after all the guilt tripping, Michael decided to go on this victory tour with his brothers, but things had kicked off, unfortunately, with the dreaded Pepsi commercial where Michael suffered severe second and third degree burns, landing him in the hospital. He would end up donating the entire $1.5 million settlement he received from Pepsi to the Brotman Medical Center in Culver City, California, which was the hospital that treated him. What was crazy that right after Michael gets treated for his burns in the film, Joe is more concerned about the future of his career than the fact that Michael could have literally died. It was just crazy. But the accident did unfortunately lead Michael to having a lifelong painkiller dependency, along with significant physical scarring and increased reliance on wigs over time. Michael would go on to continue with the victory tour after his recovery, even though it was a mess because of Joe and his business partner, boxing promoter Don King. Now, we didn't really get to see the full extent of the chaos behind the scenes in the movie because it would have been a bit much. But they faced major backlash because of the ridiculously high ticket prices for the time, and also the fact that you had to purchase a minimum order of 4 tickets and also order them through a mailing system, which also sucked. So I think this might have been the start of Michael's strong feelings towards touring in general.
Can we just do it again without the negative saying that you don't like the tour? I don't like it though. I know.
Now, Michael would donate his share from the tour to charity, but what really brought this all home in the film was when Michael announces at the end of their last show that this was their last tour together, and Joe was clearly pissed because he wanted to squeeze every single last dime out of them for as long as he could. But Michael stood up for himself and went on his solo path, leading to all the later success that we would read and hear about, of course, like his Bad era, which we get to see a little bit of at the end of the film. Now, I do think this might have been better as a series because there was just so much that had been left out because of the time crunch, obviously, but it was still a pretty solid film in my opinion. I don't really bother looking at critic scores and ratings for these biopic movies really, because to me, it's not really about the writing and all those other things because it is about someone's real life. But they did get some things wrong and didn't really explain a few things here and there all that well. But it's a movie, so I wouldn't really expect 100% accuracy, but it has done a very good job in bringing out the fans. While I was in the theater, there were people taking pictures in front of the screen and also while the movie was playing. And there have also been some people I've seen as I've been watching other people's content, particularly on TikTok. They had been doing a little much in my opinion because at the end of the day, people just want to watch the dang film, you know? But I must say that I appreciate the excitement and also how younger generations are also enjoying Michael's timeless tracks and making this film already one of the highest grossing musical biopics ever, already making over $300 million. But what did you guys think about Michael? Let me know in the comments. I'll catch you all in the next one.